Right, good evening everyone, and welcome to the Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation. My name is Jason James, and event after the summer recess, and we've got a nice chewy subject for you, which is the internationalisation of higher education. And I see we have quite a few experts in the room, and of course we've got three up here. And I will just introduce our chair, who is Leslie Heyman, and then she'll introduce the speakers. Leslie is now Deputy Vice Principal at Pearson College, London, where she's in charge of their international strategy. Before that, she had a long career at the British Council, and indeed she worked with me at the British Council in Tokyo and was Deputy Director with particular responsibilities for education. And she was in Japan for 5 years, and I can tell you from personal experience has an encyclopedic knowledge of both the UK and Japanese higher education sectors. So over to you.
So thank you very much, Jason, for your very generous introduction. So just sit down. So it's my pleasure this evening to be here and to chair this session, and it's my great pleasure to introduce the speakers tonight. We have two very eminent speakers on the subject of internationalisation of higher education in Japan and the UK. So first of all, may I introduce Professor Miki Horie. Miki Horie is an Associate Professor of International Education and a Director of the Division of International Affairs at Ritsumeikan University, Kyoto. She is a researcher of international higher education and intercultural learning, and her current research focuses on transnational joint programs in East Asia and the students' personal intercultural development through such programs. Professor Horie received an MA in Education from Nagoya University in 1995 and a PhD in Education Policy and Administration from the University of Minnesota in 2003. So I'm very lucky to have Professor Horie here tonight, and she has just arrived in the UK and she's looking very much awake, so I'm still awake. And other speaker is eminent Professor Simon Marginson. Simon Marginson is Professor of International Higher Education of the Institute of Education, University College London. Professor Marginson is one of the world's leading scholars in higher education studies and international comparative education. He holds a PhD from the University of Melbourne with his thesis on markets and education. And from November of this year, he will become director at the ESRC Hefke Centre for Global Higher Education. And I had a brief look at Professor Marginson's publications and discovered that printing them out was going to take a great number of pages on my printer, because he has a very eminent and very impressive list of publications in his field. So I think we're very richly welcome tonight with these two speakers. So what I'm going to ask each of the speakers to do is to speak for about 20 minutes each, and at the end of, there will be no break between the two, and at the end of the two sessions I will throw the session open to questions from the floor, and then we'll see how it goes, and we'll have question and answer 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll go downstairs and have drinks as the usual practice here. So without any further ado, may I ask Professor Horie to speak.
Okay, so 皆さんこんばんは。Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Miki Horie, and thank you very much for a great introduction. And I don't have anything to add to my introduction, but I just want to excuse myself. I'm really sleepy now, and because of the jet lag, and I will try to be awake until at least the end of my presentation. So my topic today is internationalization of Japanese higher education. It's a big topic, and I only have 20 minutes, so I will try to be precise and concise as much as possible. But I just want to have a little introduction about myself. I just listed all of the kind of keywords that represent my background. I call myself like a practitioner researcher. It's a combination of the two words of the international higher education. I have been in this field for about 17 years now, since I started as this job as an international student advisor So I started as an international student advisor, and then I shifted to the study abroad advisor and coordinator. And now I teach intercultural communication and leadership to the students. And also I'm now joining the board of the Division of International Affairs as one of the directors at the Ritsumeikan University. So I like working with students and through like teaching and advising and coordinating programs and also training. But also now I work with like the government and the international institution for the policy making too. So I'm kind of in between the practitioner and the researcher. But I like taking a balance of those two. And also I picked up some name of countries where I have an experiences. I was born in Japan and also educated mostly in Japan. Then but I had a 1 year chance to study in China as an exchange student in China. It was 1990. Now you can calculate my name, but I was an exchange student to the Nanjing University. So that was the really eye-opening experience for me. That was right after the Tiananmen Square incident, and especially also it was in Nanjing, which means Nanjing, I think, is one of the most difficult place for Japanese to live in. But anyway, that 1 year experience gave me a lot of opportunity to look at myself as like how I grow myself through the intercultural experiences. So that's how I started kind of never-ending journey in this field. But anyway, then after that, I went to the United States for my PhD study because I found at the time it was early 1990, and I couldn't find anywhere I can study international higher education in Japan. So that's my background. And this is me talking about the Japanese higher education today. And if you hear the similar presentation on the same topic from somebody else, probably you may hear the different story. But this is me talking about internationalization of higher education in Japan today. I would like to show you just 3 slides to just share some background information about Japanese higher education. This graph, you don't need to read all the small letters, but this is just to show you how the capacity of higher education changed over time in Japan. You see the peak of the 18 years old population. In 1992, it was about 2 million. We had 2 million people around the 18 years old in 1992. That was a peak. And in 2007, the number went down to 1.3 million. That's a big loss. So you see the much less competition to get into the university at this moment. And the capacity is 90%, which means the total number of all the seats available at the university and junior colleges, which covers the 90% of the whole 18 years old cohort. So it's much, much easier to get into the university now. And which also means that many universities having a hard time getting all the more applicants to their university and junior colleges. And several years ago, I read the statistics saying that 40% of the whole private institutions are having a hard time to fill the quota. And by the way, there are about 780 institutions, higher education institutions in Japan, and 80% of them are private institutions. So the main kind of body to support higher education in Japan is having a financial program at this moment. And this is another kind of chart. This is about the number of international students. In 1983, it started from about 10,000 international students studying in Japan. And in 1983, actually, it was the first year of the 100,000 international student plan. It started in 1983. And the policy initiative was aiming to raise the number, increase the number up to 100,000 by the year of 2000. And actually the number was achieved in 2003, and it continues growing because we have another the government initiative called 300,000 International Student Fund. So we are on the process still now. And our East Japan earthquake was kind of impactful over to the number. So it's slightly decreasing at this moment. And about study abroad. And actually, the number of Japanese students studying abroad is decreasing, unfortunately. And the number in 2004 was slightly more than 80,000, but in 2011 it goes down to 57,000. So it's decreasing. And if you look at the number to the United States, study abroad to the US, it's 57% drop in this past 10 years. So that was really shocking news for both government of United States and also Japan. So between those two governments, there are now several different projects are going on to recover this number. But there are several research trying to figure out why this is happening. And my rough summary of those research is the student perception about the safer at home. They are really comfortable staying at home. And actually, studying abroad doesn't give them any significant impact on their employability in the market. And sometimes they see that as a risk because there are some shūkatsu period in Japan. They have to spend several months for job hunting from the end of third year to the fourth year of their college years. Then they don't want to miss the time. They just want to stay in Japan to join that stream. So they see the study abroad even as a risk. And also, they use this as an excuse, like a language barrier and a financial problems. They see it's a barrier, but I think that's a kind of easy excuse for them not to study abroad. So at the Ritsumeikan University, we try to get rid of this barrier. Then we are trying to push students. So at the Ritsumeikan, the number never decreased, but it's a big problem at this moment. So now this is the main part of my talk. So I'm going to talk about the government initiatives. And there are several different, like a series of government initiatives. And I'd like to focus on the changing rationales for internationalization. So as I mentioned, in 1983, the first government initiative to increase the number of international students started. And we called it 留学生10万人計画, 100,000 international student plan. And that was the kind of strong initiative, direct initiative of the Prime Minister Nakasone. And the reason or the rationale for this internationalization policy was for the capacity building of other countries. So basically the Japanese government spent their money to support the young people of other countries to educate in Japan, then let them go back to their country to contribute to the development of their own society. And that was partially for the post-war compensation to neighboring countries. And also the Prime Minister Nakasone was hearing a lot of criticism from the international students studying in Japan for poor quality in instruction teaching, and also a poor living environment and a poor scholarship system. So the Prime Minister Nakasone wanted to raise that quality for the international students. And that was not a competitive grant. The government just spread the budget to the different universities to build housing and also develop the Japanese language, training, and international student services. Those are mostly new to the public universities. And also some other research says this phase was quite critical and significant in terms of the professional development for international education. Probably we can call this time as like a start or the beginning of this field, this profession in Japan. And after 2000, the government just threw all the different type of competitive grant opportunities for universities. So we are supposed to write the proposals, and there was a screening, and only the successful applicants got those grants. So I don't go into the details of everything, but mainly this phase, the rationale for the internationalization was to raise the global competitiveness and the quality improvement of the Japanese universities. So now the target is not the foreign nationals, but the Japanese universities itself. So the government recognized the importance of raising the quality and also global competitiveness. So there was the opportunity for the research internationalization And also the second one is for the mainstreaming of the decision-making process for internationalization in the structure or the university itself. And several, like a Global Japan and the Reinventing Japan project for the outbound mobility programs and also multilateral mobility programs. Then after this, now we have a current policy initiative for internationalization, TGUP, which is Top Global University Project. In Japanese, it's called Super Global 大学. Super Global 大学. We are like, oh, Super Global, okay. Then this is the English term, TGUP. Yes. And the current initiative, we have also, of course, the rationales. But I see the gap between the government perspective and also institutional perspective on the why we internationalize the university. So from the government and industry's perspectives, they want to strengthen the human resource development, both domestic and international students, for global competition. So their concern is about economic growth. They would like to grow the economy of Japan through the human resource development. But from our perspective, from the institutional perspective, actually the internationalization is always the one of the key missions of the universities. These are the examples from the Ritsumeikan University. In our original mission statement, we already say the peace and democracy are the key issues, the most important thing. And to build the peace and democracy, of course, international cooperation, international aspects are the key component of the university education. So it's already there. And also we recognize at the institutional level the value of intercultural learning, which contribute to the development of student generic skills. And also we hear actually the official request from the student union, the individuals, for the increased opportunity for the international education on campus and also abroad. They give us some like a request like, well, we'd like to become more friend with the international student. We'd like to study abroad. And we say, well, you can just do it. You have more opportunities. But student want us to push them more. I don't know if we should just follow the students' request. But anyway, that is there as a student request. And also, we regard the internationalization as an important strategy to strengthen our profile and also differentiate ourselves from our competitors. Anyway, so this current Top Global University project started in 2014, last year. There was a screening process, and I don't know how many universities, but anyway, many universities wrote a proposal and submitted this proposal to the government. And the government selected 37 universities as a designated universities. And it's going to be 10 years project. So we are supposed to be responsible to achieve our target goals within 10 years until the 2023. And the purpose is, I don't need to repeat this, I guess. So the budget size is for 2014 fiscal year, for 1 year, it was 7.7 billion Japanese yen, which is 42 million British pound equivalent, I guess. So that's for 1 year in total. And there are two categories for those designated universities. Category A is a group of universities for research-intensive internationalization. So their government requests those type A universities to be more visible in the world ranking, the university ranking. The Japanese universities are not really doing well in the world ranking thing. But anyway, the government, that is one of the government's the concerns. And for the category A, 13 universities were selected, and they will receive about 420 million Japanese yen per year in a max for 10 years. And type B is more for comprehensive internationalization. So luckily, Ritsumeikan University and also Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University, both of us are selected for the type B. Type B is more for education-focused internationalization. There are several key aspects for top global university project. Usually for the previous internationalization initiatives, it was mainly for the international profiles, like a number of international students or number of study abroad students or programs. But this time, TGUP request us to work on the academic affairs, international accessibility, or personal affairs, strategic planning, teaching and learning. So every aspect of university or education and research, we have to touch, we have to do something. And as you may be already aware that the Japanese calendar system, school calendar, is not compatible with the overseas institutions. That is also one of the concerns, and we are supposed to do something with our calendar system too. So there are many different items that we have to work on. Okay, so to conclude my presentation, I'd like to just point out 4 different challenges for further meaningful internationalization. First one is that there are various institutional responses to the series of government initiatives. So since 1980s, we had different opportunities to join this competitive grant for internationalization. And some universities took this as an opportunity, like external support for internationalization, alongside with their own strategic planning. And the other universities just took it as an unwilling work or like a pressure. Then I would say those institutions who took this as an opportunity were able to accumulate the experience and also the knowledge based on their trial and error through the grant opportunities. Because with a grant, they were able to develop new programs and try to train their staff members and so on. So now I see the kind of gap between those universities who got that grant and also experiences, accumulated those like institutional learning process, and the others. And my professor, my academic advisor always told me like, well, this is like the rich get richer type of phenomenon that is happening among the Japanese universities. So I see some gap probably going wider. That is one challenge. And another challenge is about the mindset. My question is, do international students still cost? This is very different context from the British universities. In Japan, the international students have never been recognized as a source of income. When we receive the international student, our mindset is like, oh, we have to offer the tuition waiver system. We have to offer scholarship. We have to offer the cheap housing and so on. So I think it's influenced from the 1980s and 90s, where we were supposed to help those young people from overseas. And some people still have that mindset. But actually, the global higher education market is changing. And I know there are some, for example, like Chinese parents who would pay a lot of, who would buy that education for the better experience for their kids. So it's changing. But still, some of the Japanese universities have still old mindset. That is also a challenge too. The third challenge for me is the necessity for the internal communication for institutional commitment. We have to share the value of internationalization. As you have seen, the current initiatives, we can't do it within the international office only. We have to get more people around the campus involved in the process. So we have to share the value of internationalization. Also, we have to have our own definition for what does internationalization mean to us. And also, I think we have to get rid of the fear for change. Internationalization for Japanese it's a change. It's not like adding new things. We have to change ourselves. But for some people who contribute to the past achievement may feel it's what they have done before is rejected by the internationalization. So we have to be careful about also it's about the saving face issue too. So we have to be really sensitive about that too. And finally, it's about the task, but I think it's the most critical but not so spoken task, which is about the faculty and staff development for overcoming ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is a psychological condition that makes us believe that our way is universal and judge things only based on our standard. It's very natural. I think everyone is ethnocentric. But I think one of the most important goal of internationalized university education is to get rid of the people's ethnocentrism or ethnocentric mindset, so that people understand things from a different perspectives and have a more flexibility in communication. I think and we have to do this. I mean, the faculty and staff member have to overcome the ethnocentrism before students, I guess. And for students, it's easier probably, but for the older people, it takes more time. So I think we have to be kind of serious about how we can provide some training opportunities or something else. I don't know what is effective, but I think this is a really critical task for us. I think maybe
We draw to a close here.
yeah, I'm going to close it. Yeah. So there are two references here. Those are my writings, and if you are interested in some of my topic, I will. Maybe you don't need to write it down, but I can introduce this to you later. Okay. So I'm going to now close it. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございます Leslie, and konbanwa to everyone. It's very nice to have such a great group of people with us, and it's very nice for me to speak on the same platform as Miki. And I thank her very much for her valuable talk. I look forward to the discussion of it. I'll just make a few brief remarks. One of the things I think about in my work is, where are we heading in relation to cosmopolitan international relations? Because it seems to me inexorably we are heading towards some kind of world society, that it'll start to take a more definite form in terms of governance at some point in the foreseeable future. And the question that poses is which traditions are going to enter into the structuring of law and political culture and social relations in that larger environment when we go beyond the nation. And sometimes in my pessimistic moments, despite the multiplicity of traditions, great traditions, I think the world will be some kind of hybrid between the United States and China. But there's also, and that is a difficult hybrid to achieve, but I suspect will be in some sense achieved at some point. But there's also Japan and the United Kingdom. Both remarkable civilizations, immensely influential civilizations, both island nations that are in important regions but don't think particularly regionally, think more globally. Both with a greater imperial past, which was dependent on military acumen and power, a past which is no longer the present in some crucial respects, but in other ways there's great continuity. And I think one of the legacies is an abiding sense, a deep sense of self-righteousness and superiority, cultural superiority, that our view of the world is ultimately the only possible view of the world. And while that opinion, of course, is not universal in either country, and many, I think their way beyond ethnocentrism, and that kind of struggle we all have, I think, and many of us, I think, make great progress with that struggle. Nonetheless, the dominant political cultures, perhaps at a popular level, are still coloured by that sense of superiority, and I think it's an obstacle in our dealings with each other, because we do from time to time learn from each other. It's interesting to look at Japanese fiscal policy to see how closely, in some respects, it's been patterned on a treasury-led economy of the United Kingdom type. And Japanese manufacturing, of course, was so influential in the changes to British manufacturing in the last 20 years. What I want to try to talk about tonight is not to mirror Miki. I don't think Miki's given a purely Japanese perspective either, and I don't want to give a purely UK perspective to mirror a Japanese perspective. I think that we need to go beyond that. We need to think about what we have in common and how we might think about what we have in common. So that's what I want to do tonight. But I'll reflect, and I'll do that by reflecting on the great changes that are occurring in international higher education. Because it's a period of immense transformation in the university sector especially, but it's most of all in its cosmopolitan and international dimension. The worldwide participation in higher education is now going up at a rate of 1% a year. Now that may not sound remarkable, but 1% a year is 20% in 20 years. And when the proportion of people who go to tertiary education goes from 20% of the world to 40%, you're moving towards a stage where the majority of people are being educated. Now, that proportion is now 1/3 across all countries, including the most underdeveloped countries. 1/3 of all young people are now going to some kind of post-school tertiary education. Much higher in the UK and Japan, around about 2/3 in Japan, slightly higher in the UK. Clear majorities in those countries. But, you know, in North America and Europe, Western Europe as a whole, it's about 80%. Even in sub-Saharan Africa, which is the gap in world participation, it's doubled in the last 20 years. The rate of participation is going up everywhere except in Central Asia at a rapid rate. And this, of course, means more people are going offshore, because even if only 0.5% of your population goes offshore, if you double the number of people in higher education over a 20-year period, means twice as many people going offshore. And so cross-border international education is growing at a very rapid rate. And in some respects, this is quite an achievement, because the world is not altogether kind to cross-border cosmopolitan contacts, despite the very fine work of many embassies, the British Council, many tertiary institutions and others. It's still not an easy thing to go from one country to another for education. There are fundamental difficulties and dilemmas that I think that underscore international education. The most fundamental is the first one I've listed, the tension between the principle of free global movement, which we all exercise in our minds as we go abroad for work or for vacation purposes, or to visit family members in other countries. This freedom of movement, this airport throughput freedom of movement that we think we have, the tension between that and the idea of national sovereignty. And of course, it all becomes apparent when you don't have a state anymore. Like refugees from Syria don't have a state anymore. And suddenly they need to enter another state to continue their lives. And the other states all say, no, you don't have freedom of movement. Our citizens decide who comes in here, and our citizens are going to let a few of you in, but not many of you. And the others will have to go somewhere else. But it's the same story everywhere else. So you realise then that loss of freedom of movement because of national sovereignty is a fundamental problem. Now, international students, of course, are welcomed or at least tolerated where they go. But at the same time, they don't have the rights of citizens when the countries they go to, and their rights can be taken away. And this is something which the research on international education shows creates difficulties for many international students. So crossing borders for education is not easy. And there's also the tension, which I think Mickey alluded to, you know, between a cultural approach to international education, which many of us, of course, prefer and learn a great deal from, and the commercial approach, which many in the UK would see as a very positive aspect of international education. It's a major export sector, one where which gathers valuable resources which are used in higher education and elsewhere in education in society. But the perspectives are quite different, and in some respects don't sit very easily together. You have to work hard to make it work, to make that tension, to diminish that tension, and to ensure that you meet both sets of objectives if you work in the UK in international education. The third tension I want to point to is the one of perspective, which I'll come back to again in this talk, between a view that what we're engaged in international affairs is pursuing our own interests, and one way we pursue our interests is by putting forward our view of the world to others and persuading them perhaps of our view of the world, and the other possibility, which is to learn from others, to open ourselves to other ideas, other ways of thinking, other languages, other ways of doing, and to take them into our own affairs if we can. And those perspectives are quite different. And generally, though, we tend to follow, I think, and this is true of all the export nations, we tend to follow the first track of providing our own perspectives of our own view of the world, our own educational approach to others, rather than seeking to learn from their educational traditions, and in some respects arriving at some kind of blend or hybrid in the way we educate them. And these tensions, of course, especially the first, are showing themselves in the UK in a very difficult way at the moment. I mean, the international education sector, like many other activities in higher education, is carried by people of cosmopolitan intent. The country, especially outside London, is not necessarily in the same place. And of course, some would seek to make political capital out of that, to build their political futures around a closed attitude and an anti-cosmopolitan view. And this is tremendously destructive, as the history of Europe in the 20th century shows us how destructive it can be, this kind of polarity, this kind of standoff. And we haven't found a way out of it yet. And this is bedeviling the international education sector, because slow throughput of visas is hurting us at every level when we try to recruit students, but also when we try to bring faculty in as well, and even when we welcome visitors on temporary periods from certain countries. It's becoming quite difficult. The loss of work rights for graduates especially is long-term, meaning we're going to lose many of the best prospective students who will go where those work rights are more generous, like in Canada or the United States or Australia. So these are serious problems that we're grappling with, and we haven't found a solution for. We have a minister who's essentially cosmopolitan, pro higher education and science, but I mean, he doesn't make Home Office strategy, for example. And there's a lot of water to run under this particular bridge before I think we arrive at a solution to those tensions. But one of the things I want to point to is the last point I make in the slide, which is the thing that surprised me as an Australian coming into the UK to work here and make my career and my life here, is the lack of orientation to East Asia amongst most people, most good people in the higher education sector. There's a great deal of interest in Europe in the higher education sector, more than there is in the country as a whole, I suspect. And there's also awareness of Africa in the UK, which is very credible in some respects. Go past India and things start to fade out. Hong Kong and Singapore seem to be in people's minds for historical reasons, but there's not a great deal of understanding of Korea or Japan or China yet, even though everyone knows China must be important. And it's surprising how the world's third largest economy slips off the radar still, Japan. So, and you see this showing itself in the pattern of research collaboration. I mean, this is a great region, you know. People don't realise, I think, yet that East Asia economically is as wealthy as Western Europe or more wealthy, with China, of course, coming up, but Japan, Taiwan, Korea, you know, already with European levels of per capita income, and Hong Kong and Singapore wealthier than that, and the little casino enclave in Macau as well. So, I mean, this is an immensely important economic region, but also in terms of scientific production, it's producing now as many papers as Europe is, and will, on present trends, pass North America soon. In China alone will pass North America about 6 or 7 years down the track. So research collaboration in the higher education sector with East Asia is very strategically necessary. In the UK, we have focused on Europe because that's where the great collaborative grant schemes are. Income is the driver, as it so often is in higher education in the UK, with such a tight budgetary approach to the sector. And we've become very good in the UK at accessing European research money, the best country in Europe at that, in fact, and at working with partners in Europe. So we've got terrific international collaborations in Europe. But our rate of collaboration in Asia, with 1.00 being a normal rate of collaboration determined by the rate of collaboration of both countries with all countries, and anything above 1 being a high rate of collaboration. We've got high rates of collaboration in the English-speaking world, except the US and Canada, and in Europe, but poor rates of collaboration. 0.62 with Japan, a very low rate of co-authorship on these kinds of statistics. Anything below 0.75 is very low. And it's a mystery to me why it's this bad. In China, even worse. And all the other English-speaking countries do better than the UK in East Asia on these collaborative statistics, and quite a lot better. Like the US, much better with Japan and China. Australia much better with China and better with Japan than the UK, and so on. So this is a surprising and worrying thing, and something I hope that we'll begin to correct. How do we begin to think about things differently? How do we begin to bring the higher education sector into a different way of approaching international matters? I just want to suggest two methodological moves, if you like, two ways of thinking, which we might seek to generalise. One is accepting, understanding that higher education and research science and knowledge are positioned simultaneously in three arenas: in local affairs, in national affairs, and international and global matters. And that the sector needs to become good at all three, that each of us who seek to play a role in the sector need to be able to work in all those dimensions at the same time. And success for higher education in the UK lies in successfully coordinating and synergising the local aspects of international with the international aspects of international. So there's that if you like, that three-dimensional way of thinking. The other one I want to suggest is Amartya Sen's notion of transpositional objectivity. This starts from the premise, as so often with Amartya Sen when he talks about cultural matters, that we are multiple, that there are many cultures, and this is someone who's been cross-cultural, of course, in his own career, very successfully and very effectively so. And he says from each viewpoint, whether it's a national viewpoint or it's a professional viewpoint or some other affinity group, we can only see certain things. We can't see everything. Others can see different things to us. Positional specifications are typically incomplete, nicely said. However, a more objective inquiry can be achieved by drawing on more than one position simultaneously, by exercising ourselves to think from the point of view of the UK, from the point of view of Japan at the same time. That's how we might take relations forward, I think. And when that is happening from both sides, and that dialogue between the respective agents from both sides is occurring, then we begin to aggregate a positional viewpoint. We begin to see things from two or more perspectives at the same time. We begin to have a deeper, better understanding, not only of each other, but of the world as a whole. So I find that very helpful, and I recommend Amartya Sen's article to you. I will take this way of thinking, I hope, into the new centre. Leslie, if I can, I just might say a couple of things about our forthcoming international work. The new centre will open on the 12th of November. This is the first time the ESRC has funded a centre specific to higher education. The future of higher education, in fact, was the call that the ESRC put out. And I was pleased to find that the ESRC was interested in a global or international emphasis within that. We've called our centre the Centre for Global Higher Education, but it will deal with UK national and local matters. It will deal with the triangular, three-dimensional perspective that I talked of before and attempt to bring the things into line with each other. But one of the nice things is that we've got such good international partners, including Hiroshima through Wang Futao, and he will work with other colleagues in Japan on our centre's work. We have 13 projects, of which 5 have an international dimension. Now, the centres, in fact, the majority of projects have some kind of comparative aspect, but 5 of the 13 projects are within what we call Program 1, which is the global perspective. And that's a listing of those projects here. On the left, on the far column, you see the titles of these projects in shorthand. The 3 of them are particularly interesting, for this gathering. One is a comparison of different countries' approaches to the public or social, the public good role of higher education institutions. Partly, I guess, what states want higher education institutions to do is included under that heading of public, but also it's partly about what they do on their own behalf in civil society as public actors. So this is distinct from the production of benefits for individual students, the sort of private benefits. This is the collective and social aspects of what higher education does. Now, this is understood differently from country to country. We're struggling with this in the UK to make sense of the public good role. I mean, we talk about higher education increasingly in terms of private benefit, and so as partly to underpin a high tuition regime. But there's no reason why you can't have high tuition and still do public good. So the two are not necessarily zero sum. But what's happened is that public good issues have fallen off the radar. We're also looking at comparative governance of higher education in Europe, and we're also looking at what happens to UK graduates who are international students when they go back to East Asia. No one's done any work on that. Students from China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, who do their complete their studies here and then go back to their own countries. No one's really tracing effectively their jobs, outcomes, their career paths, their salaries. We know a lot about domestic UK graduates. It's one of the markers we use to measure the performance of institutions, but we don't know much about the work and outcomes and salaries of East Asia and other international students when they go back home. In fact, their post-graduation work seems to be a non-topic in the UK at the moment, but of course it's important, and it's an important aspect of them coming to the UK that they should seek to get some career benefits or advantages from that. So that was very difficult to gather data from students, of course, the graduates once they go back, but that will be challenging, but that'll be an important project. Just to give you a little bit more detail on that public good project. I mean, one of the things that I love about Japan is the attitude that people have to the common or communal space. You know, remember when I used to walk from Saijo near Hiroshima University to Hiroshima University every day? It was about 4.7 k's, and on that walk, which was mostly through countryside, away from the urban areas, partly into urban areas. One of the things that always struck me was that there was no litter anywhere on that whole route, nothing. It was clean, it was tidy, people looked after their environment, and the municipality paid a group of highly competent people to keep track of any litter that did appear. So it was sort of descended upon by myriads of people in white boiler suits. And I mean, there was something about that which was, I mean, so very different to Anglo-American Australian society, you know, where the garbage is all at the front right through the week, and the streets are full of things that have been left there by people who don't care about the environment that others experience. There's something about that sense of social responsibility which is different in Japan, and I think very good. And that's what I mean by different ideas about public good, you know, different approaches to the collective or common good. And I think that will tell us a little bit about what's possible in higher education. My own view is that the ultimate way forward on the public good role of universities in any country is going to lie on drawing on more than one tradition. I think also the Nordic tradition, with its powerful sense of equity and its genuine inclusion, its very high rates of mobility, and its great success in conquering the barriers that we haven't been able to conquer of class in education in the UK, and indeed in society as a whole. So there are traditions that we can draw on to make our society better, and I think that's also true of Japan. Thanks very much, Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you very much.